I was part of PACE or bringing PACE together, and what we wanted was, and what we worked hard to do is bringing all the campaign groups together. So I was actively involved in not only the teacher union strikes and the strike wave a couple of years ago, but also in some of the leisure centre closures. So, for example, I grew up in Deaton, and they closed the leisure centre in Deaton. So I worked really hard with the community in Deaton in order to um, keep that open, which we was successful in, but only on a partial basis. So what I'm hoping for PACE to do is to be able to, especially locally, is to put pressure on our council to make sure that it is run democratically, that they are for workers and they're focusing on workers' rights, and for education and helping education be able to be fully funded and funded a lot better than it is. So we got news that there was going to be closed, that Deaton was going to be closed. So I quickly sort of set up a Facebook group, brought together the local organisations that regularly use Deaton, like Deaton Basketball, the football clubs, the table tennis, netball that goes on in there. And we, vigorously campaigned. So we held a protest outside the leisure centre. We put in a deputation to speak to the council and put pressure on the council. We held several meetings. We got a law firm involved. So the law firm, sent multiple sort of questionnaires to the council, putting that extra demand on. We was very, and we still are very ready that if we need to log for a judicial review in order to put an injunction to stop that closure, then we can do. At the moment, they are building a school site there, Joseph Norton, and I'm hoping that that will bring, the need for extra usage within the sports centre to help maintain and fund the costing for running it. That community centre, it was opened through lottery funding by community members. So to me, it should be a community-run centre, funded by the council, but with community involvement, and that's what we really want. And we hope PACE can be behind organisations and groups like this as well. We want it to be council still owned, but we want more of a community involvement. We know best how maximum usage, what the community needs, how we can get that, get the usage to maximum capacity. But we're not consulted. We're not, there's no sort of consultation there. There's no discussions there. Instead, we're imposed upon. So at the moment, it only opens 3 days a week on a very short-term basis. But there is that capacity and that need there for, we've got a lot of knife crime in that area. We've got our kids who thrive in sports, and that could be one way that helps them with a brighter future. We've had young people who've turned semi-pro and pro professional footballers before. So there is that need for it, and given, sort of county lines and, postcode sort of knife crime, some of our kids are too scared to go to other areas. So it's not as easy to say, well, 100 metres down the road there's another area that they can use. It's not the same because they don't feel safe there. So it is important that we keep our local communities open. We've already had so many cuts to the council. They're not managing the budgets well. We used to have a lot more sort of holiday clubs run, that was council led on the fields in every council estate, so that children had somewhere to go. Sports were a priority, and them cuts have just been really damaging to the community. But I also feel that schools have a responsibility as well. So I'm very against school exclusions. And I don't mean that in terms of, if you've got a student that's sort of needs removing from your class because they're deregulated, they're not removed. But when we put students on part-time timetables, we exclude them for 2 and 3 days at a time. We're leaving them open to be groomed by gangs, the vulnerable children often, and that's why they're deregulated in school and they haven't got that consistency at home. And that, coupled with the fact that we don't have youth services, we don't have affordable sporting and opportunities out there for our children in the local community, has a massive impact. And there's only so much the few of us that are active in that field can do without proper funding and then bids that are available in order to run proper clubs and youth centres for kids. think that's a wider picture because it comes down to the government funding. For instance, teachers have just been awarded 4%, which the government accepted in full, but they're only going to fund 3% of that. It leaves a shortfall of, I think it's somewhere between 300 to 400 million for every schools, and they're expecting schools to make further cuts. Well, these cuts are only going to come in the forms of support staff in schools that will be there to support children that are deregulated. Schools can't afford stuff like glue sticks and basic equipment, yet I don't know where they expect schools to make further savings in order to fund this pay rise. So it is going to have a massive impact on our most vulnerable students. So never mind having provisions, we're not even have the staff in there to support them, let alone provisions that are needed in place, which you're absolutely right. If schools had provisions, it would make it a lot easier. But I feel like often children are wrote off, there's too many pressures because it's very statistic based on exams, results. So schools are under so much pressure in terms of what head teachers have to face in order to meet unrealistic targets because of funding, and it has that wider implication because there's nowhere to put them. I think alternative provisions, there's a number of alternative provisions, but they're so full to capacity, and again are lacking the proper funding and resources that are needed to make it successful and sort of feasible for students, that they're not meeting their needs really. I think it has. I mean, the NEU, we don't affiliate to any political parties. That leaves us open to put pressure and campaigning on any government that's in place. And that's one thing I am actually glad about because, like a lot of unions, we feel let down by Labour. Labour made a lot of promises to improve recruitment and retention, to address workload for teachers, to fund schools properly, and that hasn't happened. So we feel really let down, and why, we're really pushing for a new left party because there isn't a party there that is for workers' rights. And we would certainly welcome and get behind a new left party. There's reasons why we've never affiliated, but for myself personally, as an executive member, I would be working with other left executive members to try and push for us to affiliate. I think the best place to do that is our annual conference because that's our supreme governing body, and allowing the members to make that decision in a democratic way. But I would certainly put that option on the table in order to help and make sure members are aware of why we would be calling for that and see if they would support. We'd want a government that's going to work with us, that's going to listen to unions and work with trade unions. We certainly for the NEU, because we're education based, we know what works best for our schools. At the moment, the government isn't working with us. We've still got our big campaign in terms of stop school cuts. We're still, looking at balloting members because of the unfunded pay rise. We know what underfunding is going to be like, so we would certainly want a party that is going to work hand in hand with trade unions, is going to work democratically, are a part of the workers' struggle. Well, we've always got our school cuts campaigns, so we want an education that's fully funded because we know the pressure that underfunding has on schools. We've welcomed the news of them extending free school meals to those on universal credits in line with free breakfast so that we can end, food poverty in schools. We will continue to put pressure on for fully funded schools in terms of pay rises. We're still going to be putting pressure on to restore teachers' pay because there is still a gap in our pay that from 17 years of austerity and underfunding, that gap hasn't been matched yet. We had a 6.5% pay rise when we did go on strike, but we're not there yet in terms of matching what we should be at if we hadn't had years of underfunding and underpay. So, they will be our priority, and obviously addressing workload, addressing children's needs in terms of exam pressure. We don't want the cuts to our arts section of education. We believe that, we need an education that suits all children. It's not just about your academic subjects. We need a rounded education. So we'll always put pressure on for that balance. And, we want over testing to stop, because it doesn't serve a purpose, it don't meet the children's needs, and obviously we still want to abolish Ofsted in a better way of how we sort of monitor schools. We don't want more staff committing suicide because of Ofsted and the pressure of Ofsted. We know Ofsted pressure is one of the causes of teachers leaving, because it puts so much pressure on head teachers to conform, and in a very unhealthy way that is unsustainable. It's such a tough one, because we've got, almost 500,000 members, and they're all, we have a national section, which we have our big school cuts campaigns, abolish Ofsted. So we have our national campaigns, but we're also run by local districts as well. Because as you can imagine, for example, in Kirklees, we have over 3,000 members. But there is so much to do. The government, and, I feel this is deliberate, privatisation to schools means that I don't know if you know about facility time. So facility time is where schools pay into the facility pot for local unions to be able to operate. The more schools that pay into facility time means the more active branch members we can have, who are running casework, who can take on campaigns and everything else. But there's been such a huge cut to facilities time because of privatisation and academisation. More than 75% of secondary schools are academised. So that with that cut, it means that our staffing sort of structure is reduced, because we're a member-led union. I know it's really complex to try and explain, but we're a member-led union. So it means the members that, receive this facility time in order to run our campaigns, run the campaigns, is massively reduced. And that has obviously a knock-on impact, because only so much you can do if you, let's say, for example, we have one person on 3 days a week. There's only so much you can do on 3 days a week when you've got casework to do as well, given the pressure that, the amount of teachers that go off with stress, with, on disciplinaries, grievances, all sorts of reasons why you can end up with casework. It's just very time consuming. What I do think would help is if we did more cross-union work together and sort of brought our campaigns together. So in the teacher strike wave a couple of years ago, locally we organised a massive protest in Leeds, a Yorkshire run one, with nurses. Unfortunately, nurses, because of a legal challenge, wasn't able to go on strike, but every nurse that was off that day attended the protest, and we still held a massive sort of protest in Leeds. And I think it is just about getting more people aware and more activists, and getting teachers to wake up and become more actively involved would have a big impact. But teachers are worn out and burnt out, and that's part of the problem as well, is that trying to give yourself that extra bit more to be an activist as well, and try and put pressure on when you're so burnt out and you're already working 50 odd hours a week. What's needed as well is, a lot of people don't know how much impact their voice can have. And I think an organisation like Great Pace and bringing the groups together can help pool our resources to help get that message across, and make people more aware of, what needs to be done, how their voices can show, do have an impact, and just give them that space and that somewhere, I don't want to say somewhere to be, but like we had our conference of resistance, so it allowed that space for people to turn up to, so they can start getting involved and listen, and start getting an understanding of where to be, how to be more actively involved, take on more roles. And I think that's what PACE can do. It's just, having them sort of, bringing people together and just making people more aware of, the impact. So for example, when I ran the Deaton campaign, I set up a WhatsApp group, I created lots of subgroups, I got people, I asked people what role can you take in this? So, for example, whether it was, a media reporter and consulting with the media, whether it was organising a protest. So everybody had a role, and that way people felt informed and they knew what to do because they had a role and they had a part. It also committed people as well. And once you've got one person committed, it's more likely that they'll tell 2 or 3 friends, and it's that sort of branching out and getting more people actively involved. And yeah, PACE can do that, because equally for us that are activists and we know what to do and we do it on a regular basis, it can be tiring for us as well. One of our biggest sort of organisations in Kirklees has been our Palestine group. We had 5 coaches that attended the march in London a couple of weeks ago. That is huge for a town. And so it just goes to show that, when you have got them active members and people can pull together and can pull resources together, that we can pull something off massive like that. There was over 500,000 people there in London, which is huge and needed. We would actively support any staff and students who wanted to stand up against that. And I think the pressure needs to come from within, because it's the organisation that they're attending. And actually, students have the biggest voice, because without students, that's where the money comes from. And I think, students they've got so much more power than they realise. And I think, what we can do is help to educate staff and students in terms of what they can be done, what more can be done, and really putting a call out there for, them to sort of redirect their funds and where they're spending. That is what needs to be done and can be done. And we would fully support that.